For years, Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet were held up as proof that real love could survive Hollywood. They weren't loud, they weren't flashy, and they didn't sell their marriage to the public. But behind that calm image, something had already broken long before anyone noticed. 1 year after their divorce became final, Jason is finally explaining what went wrong and why walking away was the only option left. What he reveals isn't a scandal, but something far more painful, a love story that looked unbreakable. When Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet first crossed paths, it didn't feel like a calculated Hollywood pairing. It felt accidental, almost unreal. Jason had admired Lisa since childhood, long before he had a career, long before fame reshaped his life. To him, she wasn't just an actress, she was an ideal. When they finally met, that admiration turned into a real relationship, one built on emotional intensity, curiosity, and a shared sense of freedom. For years, their bond grew quietly. They weren't rushing toward marriage. They weren't chasing attention. They built a family first, welcoming their daughter and later their son, grounding their relationship in responsibility rather than performance. From the outside, it looked solid. Two people choosing substance over spectacle, raising children away from constant exposure, appearing deeply aligned in values. But what many didn't realize is that their relationship was shaped by timing. When they met, Jason was still struggling for stability, still chasing work, still trying to prove himself in an industry that hadn't fully accepted him yet. Lisa, by contrast, had already lived through fame. She had experienced its highs, its invasiveness, and its emotional cost. At the beginning, that difference worked in their favor. Jason admired her calm and perspective. Lisa respected his hunger and optimism. Over time, though, those same differences began to quietly shift. Jason's ambitions didn't fade, they intensified. And Lisa's desire for stillness didn't soften, it became essential. When they finally married years later, it wasn't the beginning of a new chapter. It was an attempt to formalize something that had already started to strain under the weight of change. Their marriage didn't collapse overnight. There was no single betrayal, no explosive argument that ended everything. Instead, the distance crept in gradually. The life Jason was moving toward no longer resembled the life Lisa had already chosen to leave behind. And while they still loved each other, love alone wasn't strong enough to stop what was already unfolding. Fame changed the direction of everything. The turning point didn't come with an argument. It came with success. When Jason Momoa's career finally exploded, his life began moving at a speed their relationship was never designed to handle. What had once been a shared journey slowly became two separate paths running parallel, close enough to touch, but never quite meeting. Before the global recognition, Jason's life revolved around survival. Auditions, uncertainty, short-term roles, and long stretches of waiting defined his reality. During those years, Lisa was steady. She was home. She was grounded. She had already learned how destructive fame could be, and she had chosen to step away from it. That balance worked until Jason no longer needed to chase opportunity. Suddenly, opportunity was chasing him. With each major project, Jason's calendar filled with long shoots in distant locations, months away from home, relentless travel, and non-stop pressure to stay visible. His career wasn't just advancing, it was consuming him. He admitted later that success became intoxicating. It gave him purpose, validation, and momentum, but it also demanded constant movement. Standing still was no longer an option. Lisa, however, had reached the opposite conclusion in her life. She wasn't interested in following him across continents or rebuilding a sense of home every few months. She wanted Los Angeles. She wanted routine. She wanted a life where presence mattered more than prestige. To her, peace was not something to earn, it was something to protect. At first, they tried to adjust. Time apart was framed as temporary. Distance was explained as necessary. But over time, physical separation turned into emotional separation. Jason was surrounded by new people, new environments, and an industry that rewarded constant reinvention. Lisa remained anchored in a world that valued continuity and familiarity. According to people close to them, this wasn't about resentment, it was about incompatibility. Jason was moving forward at full speed. Lisa was standing still by choice. Neither of them was wrong, but neither could follow the other without losing something essential. Jason later admitted that he didn't realize how much he was changing until the gap became impossible to ignore. The man Lisa fell in love with had been driven but available. The man he was becoming was successful but rarely present, and without fully intending to, he left her behind. What once felt like balance began to feel like tension, and slowly, quietly, the marriage stopped feeling like home to either of them. When emotional distance replaced intimacy. By the time the distance between them became undeniable, Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet were no longer arguing about schedules or locations. The real conflict was quieter and far more damaging. It was about how they no longer experienced life the same way, or each other. Those close to the couple later described a shift that didn't involve shouting or dramatic confrontations. Instead, it was a growing sense of emotional misalignment. Jason was living in a world that demanded constant output, energy, and momentum. Every project required him to be bigger, louder, more present to the outside world. Lisa, meanwhile, was retreating inward, prioritizing reflection, emotional stability, and a slower rhythm of life. Even their approach to parenting began to highlight this divide. Lisa believed in structure, predictability, and emotional grounding for their children. Jason, shaped by years of instability and now sudden fame, leaned toward freedom, spontaneity, and movement. What once complemented each other now caused friction. Decisions that used to feel intuitive became negotiations. Small disagreements accumulated, not because they were severe, but because they never truly resolved. The pandemic only intensified what was already breaking. Forced proximity didn't heal the distance. It exposed it. While the world slowed down, Jason felt restless and trapped, stripped of the movement that had come to define him. Lisa, on the other hand, found clarity in stillness. She leaned into routine and introspection, while Jason struggled with the loss of momentum and identity outside of work. This period, according to those familiar with the situation, was when both began to realize that the marriage they were trying to preserve no longer reflected who they were becoming. The emotional language they once shared began to disappear. Conversations became practical instead of intimate. Support turned into coordination. And then there was the weight of history. Lisa's enduring connection with her past, including her close, respectful relationship with her former husband, was something Jason had always publicly accepted. But privately, it became a reminder that Lisa's emotional world was deeply rooted, stable, and already complete in ways he couldn't fully enter. He had built a future with her, yet sometimes felt like he was living alongside a life that had already been fully defined. Jason later reflected that this was when admiration quietly began to fade, not into hatred or anger, but into something colder, detachment. The moment you stop being curious about your partner, he would later admit, is the moment everything starts to fall apart. They didn't stop caring, but they stopped seeing each other in the same way. And once that shift happened, the marriage was no longer something either of them could emotionally return to. The marriage was already over before anyone knew. By the time the world learned about Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet's separation, their marriage had already been functionally over for a long time. There was no dramatic announcement, no public unraveling. Instead, there was a quiet decision made behind closed doors, one rooted in acceptance rather than anger. According to legal documents later made public, their separation date was set in October 2020. This was not a symbolic date. It marked the moment when both acknowledged that the marriage, as it existed, could no longer continue. What followed was not a breakup in the traditional sense, but a gradual untangling of shared life, responsibilities, and expectations. They didn't rush to tell anyone. Part of that decision was practical. Their children were still young, and both Jason and Lisa were determined to shield them from unnecessary instability. Another reason was personal. Neither wanted their private grief to become public entertainment. They had spent years protecting their relationship from the spotlight, and even in its ending, they chose discretion. During this period, they continued to present a united front. Public appearances, when they happened, showed no visible cracks. To outsiders, the relationship appeared intact. But privately, they were already living separate emotional lives, navigating co-parenting while learning how to exist without each other as partners. In early 2022, they finally acknowledged the truth in a joint statement. The language was careful, almost poetic, framed around transformation and change rather than loss. There was no blame, no bitterness, just an admission that their paths had diverged. For fans, the news felt sudden. For Jason and Lisa, it was long overdue. What made the announcement so shocking was not the breakup itself, but how long they had carried it alone. By the time the world reacted, they had already done much of the emotional work required to move forward. The separation wasn't a reaction. It was a conclusion reached after years of quiet realization. And yet, even after making it public, Jason remained largely silent. He allowed speculation to fill the void, knowing that no explanation would fully capture what had happened. It would take another year before he felt ready to speak, not about the divorce paperwork, but about the emotional truth behind it. Because for Jason, the hardest part wasn't ending the marriage. It was admitting when he realized it was already gone. 1 year later, Jason finally admits the truth. For a long time after the separation became public, Jason Momoa refused to explain himself. He watched rumors grow, theories spread, and strangers reduce a deeply personal ending into headlines. But after the divorce was finalized, after the legal chapter was closed, something shifted. Jason no longer felt the need to protect an image. What mattered now was honesty. When he finally spoke, he didn't frame the divorce as a tragedy caused by betrayal or resentment. He described it as something slower, more unsettling. According to Jason, the real damage came from how success reshaped his identity. When his career took off, he didn't just gain recognition, he lost familiarity. The routines, the presence, the shared stillness that once defined his life with Lisa slowly disappeared. He admitted that he became consumed by work, not out of greed, but out of fear. Fear that momentum would vanish if he stopped. Every new role demanded more time, more travel, more emotional energy. And without realizing it, he stopped being the partner Lisa needed. She wasn't asking for fame or expansion. She wanted consistency. She wanted home. Jason acknowledged that this difference became impossible to reconcile. He was chasing growth. Lisa was protecting peace. Neither could fully follow the other without betraying themselves. Then came the moment that shocked everyone, the comment that would later circulate without context. Jason admitted there were moments when he looked at Lisa and felt something had fundamentally changed. When he said the word disgusting, he clarified, it was never meant as an insult toward her character or her humanity. It was his reaction to emotional estrangement, to the shock of recognizing someone you once adored as someone you no longer understood. He explained that admiration is fragile. When it fades, love struggles to survive. He wasn't repulsed by Lisa. He was devastated by the realization that they had become strangers. That loss of connection felt unbearable, and pretending otherwise felt dishonest. What Jason ultimately confirmed was this: the divorce wasn't about anger. It was about grief. Grief for the person he used to be, grief for the marriage he couldn't preserve, and grief for the truth that sometimes, even when love is real, it's no longer enough to hold two lives together. Family, acceptance, and life after the divorce. Once the divorce became official, there was no celebration and no sense of relief. For Jason, the end of the marriage marked a quiet reckoning. He and Lisa Bonet were no longer partners, but they were still bound by something deeper and more permanent: their children. From the beginning, both agreed that whatever pain they carried would not be passed down. Legal documents confirmed joint custody, equal responsibility, and no financial disputes. But beyond the paperwork, there was a shared understanding that stability mattered more than pride. Jason made it clear that fatherhood was no longer something he fit between projects. It became the center that everything else revolved around. He spoke openly about how their children grounded him during the most disorienting period of his life. Fame had expanded his world, but family narrowed his focus in the best way possible. Even as his career continued to move forward, he admitted that the divorce forced him to confront what success had cost him. Not money, not status, but time and emotional presence. Lisa, true to form, remained private. She did not contradict his words or add her own narrative to the public record. Those close to her described a woman who had already made peace with the outcome long before it became official. Her priority remained unchanged, protecting her children and maintaining a life rooted in calm rather than momentum. Jason also acknowledged that healing did not come instantly. Accepting that a love story had ended did not erase the grief attached to it. What helped was clarity, knowing that neither of them had failed and neither had betrayed the other. They simply reached a point where staying together required more compromise than either could survive. In the aftermath, Jason moved forward cautiously. He confirmed he was dating again, but without the urgency or intensity that once defined his life. The experience had changed him. He no longer spoke about forever as a guarantee. He spoke about presence, alignment, and honesty, things he now understood could not be postponed. The marriage was over, but it wasn't meaningless. It shaped him, humbled him, and forced him to confront the truth that love does not always end because it disappears. Sometimes it ends because the people inside it become someone else. Do you think Jason and Lisa made the right decision by walking away instead of forcing the marriage to survive? Or do you believe some love stories deserve one last chance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next video.